All right, well, we practiced that first round, so good evening. I'm Brooke. I am the project manager for the Collister concept study. Before I go any further, I just want to get some verification that you guys can hear me. In the chat box, if somebody could just throw in a yes, that's all I needed to hear. So thank you guys so much. It's a privilege to be before you. This isn't our first time coming out to visit folks. It was at round 2, so we were out here earlier this year discussing Collister and really trying to engage with you to make a determination. What is it the vision you want your street to become? So a couple things before we get started. I do want to just draw your attention to the link that is at the top of your screen, www.menti.com. There's a code there, 32340782. Please just start the process of logging in. You don't need to necessarily use it now because the questions we're going to ask at the end of today's presentation are going to be listed there on the menti.com. Well, we'll go ahead and get started and dig into this a little bit deeper, but before we move off this screen, I do want to just say thank you for participating. I recognize that several of you have already participated in the survey that's been out for 1 week. So much of what you're going to see this evening's presentation may be stuff that you've already seen in that survey. While I recognize that you may have given us comments, we still want to encourage you guys to participate as we move forward and have that discussion with your neighbors this evening. With that, I'd like to go over a couple ground rules and some other ways in which you guys can communicate through this process. WebEx Q&A, that is what we're utilizing to be able to facilitate tonight's meeting. Several ways in which you can chat with us. Typically, if you've done this before, you're going to notice the chat box is a very good location to throw your questions in. Want to encourage you to do that throughout this, and we do have some teammates here who are helping me navigate this evening's presentation, and they'll be the ones logging on there to answer your questions. In addition to that, you have the ability to raise your hand, similar to other types of web services. Go ahead and just click the little hand box. We'll draw attention to you. We'll ask your question, unmute you, and get that question asked. And then lastly, there's a box down there. It's got 3 little dots. If your device isn't picking up on all these other means in which to chat with us, click on that little box and you're going to have some other options available to you. But before we get off the screen, I do also want to talk a few ground rules. While I recognize passions may be high, this is such an important project for the community, for your neighborhood. Please be respectful. I ask that we take into account what other people are saying, but we also respect what other people are saying. And just remember at the end of this presentation and tomorrow, you're still neighbors and you're going to have to live side by side. And so we do want to recognize while passions are high, you may have an opinion, be respectful to your neighbor, and it'll make this evening's presentation that much smoother. All right, we'll just go ahead and jump into the presentation. All right, much of what we've already discussed, just kind of in general, how it is that we got here, what it is that we've done in outreach, and more importantly, how it is I've been communicating. And so I do want to draw your attention to the screen before you. I have met with several of you out on your property. I've spoken to you over the phone or corresponded via email, and I want to continue to do that as we move this project into this next phase. With that being said, if you have any additional questions or you'd like to reach out to me, there's 2 ways in which you can do it. At that link below, projects@achd.org, and just put in this title, Collister Concept Study, and it'll get directed to me. That's one way in which you can send a question, and or you can give me a call, 208-387-6318. I'll pick up the phone and we can chat about any of your concerns. But I do want to encourage you, as we've done in the past, please reach out to me if there's something still outstanding and you have some questions. So let's just go ahead and jump into how we're going to do this presentation. You're going to see much of this, like I said, was in the survey that's been online, but I do want to just highlight kind of how we got here. More importantly, what we did in our initial outreach to help make a decision on these concepts that are moving forward. So if we can just scroll down, I want to go over what we heard from folks when we originally did this outreach effort. We asked folks back this past summer how it is that how you navigate Collister, what's important to you. And many of you, 70 at this case, of the 94 respondents, 70 of you resided on Collister, you were residents. But we dug in a little bit deeper, like how is it you're using this space? It's so important that we create an environment that's comfortable for all, but we wanted to know how you're using it as it is today. 53 of you mentioned that you bike, 67 mentioned that you walk, several of you mentioned that you use it to get on the bus, and then some other uses. But more importantly, we recognize that Collister is getting used. So the next slides, I'm going to talk about primarily what we heard as options, because it is those preferred options that are helping us make a determination today. So the preferred options before us, you're going to see, we asked 194, actually 194 of you participated, and here's your responses. 112 of you voted that you'd like to see some type of sidewalks along this corridor. 25 voted that you'd like to see some sort of bike facilities. 14 of you said leaving it as is, you'd rather just not touch it. And then some other enhancements, we saw chicanes and we saw the RFBs, which is that rapid flashing beacon. But I want to hear and go over quickly what was the least preferred option. And just to draw your attention, 121 of you said leaving it alone is not an option. So while we recognize that there's differing approaches on how we're going to achieve this bike, ped, and vehicle uses on this Collister, we're going to talk about some of the things we took off the table real fast. But before I do that, let's talk about some of the things that you're going to see on these projects. So we've got two items that you're going to definitely see in all of these concepts that we're going to present to you. The RFB, which is a flashing beacon, really does provide a warning beacon for pedestrians for crossings. And that is very important, especially in locations like John's Landing and up closer to State Street. We really want to provide an environment that makes it comfortable for you to get a Collister. And the RFB allows us in which to do that. The other options is bulb outs, and you're going to see that suggestion in all three of the concepts. The bulb outs really do shorten that distance that pedestrians have to cross, and we actually build out into the road in which to provide and facilitate that crossing. If you want to know more, you can click on those links, view more bulb outs, view more RFBs, if you want to learn a little bit more, but I'd suggest you just do that outside of this evening's presentation. Couple things that we did eliminate, and there's a reason why. Chicanes is oftentimes a tool in which we would use in applying a traffic calming treatment to our roadways, a way to slow cars down. We did hear when we came out the first time that speeds are quite fast on Collister, and the neighbors would like to see us come up with a solution that slows those vehicles down to create that comfortable environment for folks navigating that space. However, chicanes, which is an S-shaped turn that we apply to a street, so we physically alter the street, those were removed as an option primarily because the number of driveways that are along this corridor. We wouldn't necessarily be able to implement adequate chicanes throughout this corridor to provide for that service and that treatment without disrupting the driveways, and that's important. So we took that off the list. The other one that we took off the list is speed bumps. And the reason we took speed humps off the list is because for us to actually make a difference to slow vehicles down, we'd have to have a significant number of speed humps. And that certainly would provide some concerns for residents who reside along there. Certainly some of them may not necessarily want that in front of their homes. So we took speed humps off of the list. Moving on to the next slides, I'd like to kind of go over some of the options in which we did consider. And so before, what you've got in front of us is concept one. Concept one is in its current configuration. You're going to see that there is a slider. So I'll talk briefly to this. So you've got on-street parking on one side. You hit buffered bike lanes, 2 vehicle travel lanes, a raised bike lane, and a sidewalk. This concept actually is one of your largest footprints. This footprint really does provide for pedestrian facilities on one side, but rather removes parking on the other. In addition to this, we look to adding in bulb outs throughout this whole corridor, and it allows you to be able, like I mentioned, provide for that pedestrian crossings. Concept one is at 51.5 feet, if I'm correct. I'm sorry, 52 feet, and does significantly provide, while it provides for pedestrian facilities and bike facilities on both sides, but pedestrian facilities on one, the footprint is significant and does have some trade-offs. And so I'll go to that here in a moment with some of the challenges. And so we'll scroll down to see what some of those challenges are. But before I do that, I just want to draw your attention to something that you can take a look at on your own time. And I won't spend too much time here, but this is the aerial visual of concept one. There's several ways in which you can flip through this. At the bottom of this aerial visual, there's 3 pages. And outside of tonight's presentation, I want to encourage you to log on there and take a look. This aerial visual could allow you to narrow in a little bit more to see maybe what this potentially could look like in front of your house. But something else I want to draw your attention to is what you see to the left, and that's the pedestrian level of traffic stress and the bicycle level of traffic stress. Both of those are 2. And before we go any further, I want to talk about what exactly it is the level of traffic stress. ACHG recently adopted this approach to ensure that whatever treatment facility we put forward does attain a high level of comfort for all. And a high level of comfort for all would actually require us attaining a level 1. So with regards to these 2 projects, or I'm sorry, this project and the 3 concepts, we did this in evaluation and made a determination that should either any of these concepts go forward, a high comfort for adults, a level 2, and a high comfort for all, level 1, is attained in each one of these concepts. We're not going to go into detail too much, but I do want to just say in this particular one, we do have a level 2 for both. So we're going to kind of flip into the next slide. And I think the next one that's coming up is that great slider that I highlighted earlier. This slider gives you kind of a depiction, if we were to take this concept and lay it out onto your street, what that potentially would look like. What I highlighted earlier was that, that depiction right there. You've got on-street parking on one side, buffered bike lanes, 2 vehicle travel lanes, which, important to note, those vehicle travel lanes are reduced to 10.5 feet. And the reason for that is actually that allows us to calm traffic through this corridor. Raised bike lanes with a vertical element to that sidewalk. I do want to talk about a few of the challenges, however, with this particular project. So while we may have pedestrian facilities on one side, we don't necessarily have pedestrian facilities on both sides. And as a result, I do want to draw attention to the fact that should we have to actually do any type of maintenance work on the side where the sidewalk is, that would require us to ensure that we have a traffic control detour put in place to ensure that pedestrians can still navigate through that space safely while at the same time taking care of the maintenance. The other part I really want to highlight, and something that we took a little extra effort in, was going back and taking a look at the impact on trees. When we first came out to you to have this vision for your neighborhood and discuss that vision for your neighborhood, we heard a couple things. Parking is important and trees are important, and keeping that character. Well, tree canopy is important. And so recently we went out with the Boise City Forester to take a look at these concepts and to see what they would do if we laid them in their current configuration on your street. And I do want to highlight that should this configuration move forward, there would be significant tree impacts. As a result of that analysis, we're going to take it a step further in the coming months and take a look at those tree impacts and especially take a look at these concepts. To the point, these concepts are very high level. Tonight, we want to hear your insight, we want to hear your questions, and find out which of these you like. Now, is it necessarily saying that one of these concepts be the one that we move forward this coming spring? That may not necessarily be the case. It may be a mix of options. But your input today is really important. It'll help us narrow it down, allow us to go back to the drawing table and come up with a solution that meets the needs for your neighborhood. So we're going to move into concept 2. Concept 2, same concept here. This is kind of your aerial visual. We'll give it a pause just for a minute and let it buffer in. So concept 2, this is the smallest footprint of all of them. Concept 2 has parking on the west side, 2 vehicle travel lanes at 10.5 feet, 3-foot buffer, and a multi-use pathway. You'll notice in this one that pedestrian facilities is only located on the east side. I'm going to take a moment really quick and talk about why it is that we have most of our pedestrian facilities reflected on the east side. And that's because a number of the attractors. When we made the decision to remove parking, in this case, we had to remove parking from one side to accommodate the facilities. When we made that decision, we looked to the east side and all the attractors being the Collister Library, being the park, being the elementary school, and we recognized that all of those attractors are located on the east side, and so that is why we were making the suggestion that the pedestrian multi-use pathway be located on the east side to help facilitate folks getting up and down the corridor. In addition to that, I do want to highlight on all the concepts, the RFB pedestrian crossings at State Street and Johns Landing. Important to note that we are providing those additional facilities, pedestrian treatments so people can cross Collister safely. Moving on, we're going to quickly just go over the aerial visuals and just really encourage you to go take a look while you have some time, and there's plenty of time. The survey stays open for 1 extra week. Take a look at the aerial visuals. 1, 2, and 3 pages, if you click through them, like I mentioned, is going to give you a little bit of an insight of what that potentially could look like out in your front street. In addition to that, the level of traffic stress, pedestrian level of traffic stress is at 2, and your bicycle level of traffic stress is at 1. So we definitely attain that 2 or higher for pedestrian facilities. And lastly, that footprint, it's 45 feet. It is the smallest footprint for any of the concepts that we're putting forward today. Quickly, I'm just going to kind of go over the pros and cons and some of the challenges with this particular concept as it pertains to some of the other ones. So you've got the before photo, which is what you see here. And then once you make that slider and move it forward, you've got a kind of that depiction of, should we take that concept and lay it down on the street? What is that going to look like? So again, on-street parking is retained on the west side. Vehicle travel lanes, 10.5 feet. That 3-foot buffer is reflected there as stamped concrete. And again, that multi-use pathway. Back to that point, however, I made on concept 1, they pretend to all concepts that do not have pedestrian facilities on both sides. If for whatever reason we'd have to do construction on the multi-use pathway, again, we would have to provide that pedestrian detour services so folks can navigate through that space. In addition to this, we want to highlight some of the improvements at John's Landing as well. We want to ensure that that RFB is highlighted there as well as on State Street. And again, this is the smallest footprint. And so the tree impacts to this, in this particular case, is less compared to the other two concepts. We can move on to the last concept. We're going to highlight this again coming up. Concept number 3 is one of our largest concepts, and again, one of our largest footprints. This is if we were to take and pedestrian accommodations on both sides, what would that potentially look like? So in this case, we have the sidewalk illustrated there on the west side. You have parking maintained. You have 2-foot travel. You have 2 travel lanes at 10.5 feet, a 3-foot buffer, and that 11-foot multi-use pathway. However, there's something different about this one as well. And I want to highlight what we are doing between Catalpa and John's Way. So there is an existing bikeway on John's Landing. John's Landing provides what we call the Northwest Bikeway. You come down John's Landing, turn onto Collister, and then you can turn onto Catalpa. In that particular location, especially on the west side, we do not have any front-on housings. There's two houses depicted there, and they have adjacent streets. But between that corridor, there isn't any front-on housing. So that allows us the opportunity to look to that space a little bit different and allows us to explore options to provide safe connections for folks who are on that Northwest Boise Bikeway to come off of John's Landing, turn onto Collister, continue down to Catalpa, and then cross onto Catalpa, continuing on the Northwest Boise Bikeway. This is an important connection. It's certainly one we're exploring to better use that space to be able to provide for connections for those cycling through this area of all ages. In addition to that, we'll go ahead and scroll down. We're going to talk briefly again to those aerial visual. Because we are providing facilities on both sides, we have got the facilities on the west side as well as the facilities on the east side. We're able to attain a level of traffic stress 1, which means comfort for all users. In addition to this, should you want to spend a little bit more time to dig into this a little bit deeper, I want to encourage you outside of tonight's presentation, log on there, flip through those pages, see what this is going to look like there in front of your house. The footprint for this one, however, I want to draw your attention to is 51.5. Again, it's one of the larger footprints that we're considering. And again, these are all just considerations and all very high level, and you guys get to help us narrow it down as we move forward for the appropriate treatment for your neighborhood. Moving on to what this is going to look like, that visual depiction of should we take this concept and lay it out onto your street. You'll see there the before photo. And then once we lay it out, you're going to see what it looks like. So you've got that sidewalk there reflected again on the west side, on-street parking, 2 vehicle travel lanes at 10 feet, a buffer, as well as that multi-use pathway. Definitely want to draw attention to what you're seeing depicted in this photo. While we take this footprint and lay it out, what you don't see is the movement necessarily of that fence and that utility. And I draw attention to that because these treatment options are, and in this case, 51.5 feet. So that is a significantly larger footprint and would require the movement and disruption of items such as that fence or those utility poles. One other thing to note about this, again, should that footprint go in place, this does have a significant impact on existing tree canopy and something that we're taking into consideration as we move forward and we look at these options. Moving along, we're going to just kind of jump into what you can anticipate in the next steps. As I highlighted when we came into tonight's presentation, this really is just about engaging with you to help narrow down our options. None of these options necessarily in their entirety may move forward. We may take pieces of this. So we're going to come back with a concept that is going to meet your needs, and we need your help to get us there. So what you can anticipate here in the coming months. As we wrap up tonight, you'll have tonight's virtual open house. The survey will stay open for one more week. And then we're going to go back to the drawing table, take a look at all the comments, filter through some options, and come back to you at a later date. Should we come back to you in spring or summer, the idea is for you to continue to help us narrow it down. We're committed to coming up with a solution that provides for everyone navigating the space, while at the same time recognizing the important things your neighborhood brought to our attention. And in this case, we heard from you. Parking is important, tree canopy is important, safety is important, and allowing people to navigate this space comfortably to get to some of these attractors are important. And so we have a lot to unpack and a lot of direction going forward, but we need more of it tonight. So in the next couple slides, we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit. We're going to engage with you, and we want you to help us go through some of these questions, allow you guys to participate and answer these questions that we're going to come up with. But before we do that, I got to make sure that you guys are all plugged in. So again, go to www.menti.com, use the code 32340782. I'm going to give you just a few minutes. I'll mute myself. I'm going to disappear for a moment, give it a few, maybe 1 minute to get you guys logged in, and then we're going to jump right into the Q&A segment of this. I'll be back. Thank you. All right, I think I gave you guys plenty of time to log in. If you haven't, we're moving forward. Hopefully you'll join us. All right, let's go on into the next phase of this. So again, what you're seeing before you is what you saw recently in the presentation, and this is concept one. We're gonna wanna dig in a little bit deeper. Before I go off the slide, let's just recap what you see. You have that 8-foot travel lanes, you've got that bike lane with a 2-foot buffer. That buffer is a door zone. I'm sorry, it's not a door zone. In that case, it's a additional protection between you and the vehicle. Apologize. And then you got the 2-foot travel lanes at 10.5 feet, that raised bike lane. And then from that raised bike lane, you actually have a vertical element between you and the sidewalk. So you really are separated from those who are navigating on the sidewalk. So we want to kind of find out what you guys think. What did you like or dislike about this option? And this is your chance to engage with us. I encourage you to give us some feedback. If you gave us feedback earlier and you were on the earlier presentation, give it to us again. Your neighbors want to hear what you're thinking, and it really does provide for good dialogue amongst all of us. I'll give you guys just a moment to populate that. It does take a moment. All right, as they start to come in, I'll start reading them out to you guys. Too wide, don't need too wide. We do not need a bike lane on 2 sides, too much pavement. Thank you guys for your feedback. So I'm assuming those comments are pertaining to concept number 1. Don't think there's a need for 2 bike lanes, would rather see multi-use pathway on one side and a bike lane on the other. The bike lane between parking and the roadway seems more dangerous for cyclists. All parking on the west side raises concerns. More cars will be parked in front of west homes. Can be dangerous for bikes next to parking if the car happens to open the door, and then a waste of space. This is all really good feedback. Please continue. We'll give it one more moment before we jump into concept number 2. And we're going to have the same question as we get through. I'm seeing that a lot of comments are coming up there in the chat. We've got a team member who's actively responding to those. So please do provide your feedback either way, chat or on the question and Q&A segment. Or if you have something you'd like to say out loud, you're certainly welcome to raise your hand and we can unmute you as we go through this. All right, we'll go ahead and just jump into the next concept. Concept 2, this is your smallest footprint at 45 feet, 8-foot parking lane, 10.5-foot drive lanes, 3-foot buffer, and a multi-use pathway. In this situation, in this concept, all the pedestrian facilities are located on the east side. There aren't any on the west side, but then again, this is the smallest footprint at 45 feet. Let's kind of go jump in there. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. Dislike or like, here's an opportunity to provide some feedback. Give a moment and I'll pause. All right, the comments are starting to come in. Still would rather have nothing, but this is the best of the 3 options. Thank you for your honest feedback. We do appreciate that. And everybody's feedback is so important. So keep them coming. Visually narrow and keeping with the neighborhood feel. Certainly we recognize that's important. Why the need for a 3-foot buffer? Curb and gutter should be sufficient. Thank you for your feedback. I'll talk to that one just here in a second. I'm wondering where the trash carts will fit in all these concepts. Will there be room on the street? Very good question. Would love to see some green stormwater treatments without the need for a rolled curb. This seems like the best use of space with the greatest protection for bike and walkers. So I quickly just want to go through that buffer. Good point and something to draw attention to. Our recent adoption of the level of traffic stress did provide some new guidelines regarding our multi-use pathway. That multi-use pathway, for us to attain that 1 or 2, does require us to add in a buffer. Although I will recognize there's context sensitivity in everything we do. And so while we go through this next iteration and we narrow these projects down, everything we're looking at is what we're going to do to provide the best comfort for everybody navigating through this space, while also looking into our disruption to the neighborhood itself. Very good questions. Let's keep jumping in here. Love to shrink the width of everything to allow for a bigger buffer. Thank you for that comment. What about the mailbox consideration? Very good. I also don't particularly care for all street parking to be on the west side. Very hard to see when you're pulling out of the west side street. Other than that, I love it. Fabulous. I'd love to see some lighting. Very good point. A lot of this is lighting is one of the safety concerns that we take into account, especially at crossings. So certainly appreciate the feedback. I'm going to scroll down a little bit because I think there's one more last lingering comment. I'm concerned about the cyclist safety. People aren't expecting fast moving traffic coming down the hill. It's already hard to get back out onto the street. A very good point, and you're right. Cyclists can get to pretty high speeds when you're navigating a hill. So very good observation. All right, so we're going to continue on to the next portion of this is look at the concept number 3. This is State Street to Catalpa, John's Landing. In this one, it is one of the larger footprints, 51.5. That is a 6-foot sidewalk, that parking lane, drive lanes at 10.5 on both sides, buffer, and a multi-use pathway. Again, to the point, being one of your larger footprints, it does have trade-offs. One of those trade-offs, and I want to highlight, besides the loss of parking on one side, is certainly that tree impact because of the larger footprint. In addition to that, however, it does provide for pedestrian facilities on both sides. And several folks did wish that we did take into consideration east and west. This is one of those options, and again, just one of your larger footprints. Again, everything is under consideration. We'd love to get your guys' feedback. So on the next slide, same question. Explain to us what you dislike or like about concept number 3. And I'll pause for just a moment to give you your fingers enough time to type. All right, looks as though we've got some comments coming back in, so let's take a look. I like the best stress level for all. It definitely is the level traffic stress for all. This is higher. This is too wide, does not take into consideration the input from homeowners on Collister, and that's why we're here tonight. So homeowners, give us feedback. We need to hear from you. Please consider a bike share to allow parking and sidewalks on both sides of Collister, as well as a reduced speed limit. Thank you for that. The speed limit is going to stay at 30 miles per hour. However, all of these options, as we take them into consideration, if we can alter the roadway and the feel, oftentimes that does result in traffic calming. Love sidewalks on both sides of Hollister, but agree that this is probably not a great option due to the impacts of residents as well as the tree canopy. And that's why we're having this conversation. I love the dual sidewalks, helps to prevent people from crossing Hollister. Very good observation. I like having the pedestrian and or bike access on both sides. Too wide, bike share. Way too wide, way too much pavement, and thank you for your feedback. I do not think there's enough bike traffic on Collister to warrant two paths. All very good observations, all very good comments, and we do appreciate it because it is these comments that we're going to take forward into helping us narrow down the appropriate treatment for your guys' neighborhood. So with that being said, let's jump on. I think we had 11 or 12 participants. I'm just wondering, oh, there we go. Be sure people will still be able to park on their property, especially with the reduced street parking. Yes, that is definitely a consideration. And I will tell you, we did do an analysis of the parking along this corridor to find out kind of what that usage is. And so that's one of the things we're taking into account. Okay, so let's kind of jump into the next question. So we asked you the dislikes or the likes. Now we kind of want to narrow it down. And so this is an interesting observation. It gives you an idea of what your neighbors are thinking. So if you could take a moment and start filling that in, we're going to let those bars dip and rise according to your responses. So let's give it a few moments. So it looks like several of you like Collister too. Several of you would like neither of the options to move forward, and we appreciate that. Concept 2 still seems to be coming out ahead at 56%. Concept 3, it's kind of shifting a little bit. We're seeing that shift a little bit with the do nothing option. All right, I think we've captured some of this. Again, concept 2 sitting at 64%, concept 3 at 27%, and then 9%. Please leave it alone. So this is really good input, and I do want to mention, while all of you guys who are participating in this process, several folks have also participated on survey, and so we're taking everybody's survey comments as well as this and moving it forward. I did see that we've got some comments that are popping up. Sarah, I think I saw you put something in there. We'll get to those questions here in a moment or in chat. And we're going to let our technical folks get on that and give you a response. All right, so if we can move on to the next question. Please elaborate on why you prefer one concept over another. So if you liked 1 over 2 or 2 over 3 or however it is, now's your opportunity. So I'm going to pause and let your fingers do the talking, and I'll come back and just here in a moment. All right. Give it a moment. Here we go. All right, you guys are starting to come back. Okay, prefer sidewalks on both sides of the street, but no more pavement. Tough, I know. It is. This is one of those tough projects. I like number 2 because the impacts of residents from a strictly pedestrian perspective. I like 3 more. Thank you. It is, and this kind of the challenge we have with this is balancing the needs of the community, right? While at the same time recognizing the importance of ensuring that neighborhood feel for residents who reside on there. And that's our job, is to find out what that balance is. I prefer to leave everything alone. If 1 is being forced on us, 2 is the least widest. And that is, thank you for your feedback and thank you for your honesty and giving us your insight. As long as we get sidewalks, I believe everybody will be happy. 2 is narrower. There's not enough pedestrian traffic to justify the wider concepts. Thank you. Narrow, narrow, narrow. The narrower, the better. More green and less gray. Yes, the narrower we do make it, the more green and landscaping there'll certainly be. And the trees impact. I like to see hybrid of concept 2, north and south sections, and concept 3 along the bike boulevard and in the center. And you know what, we appreciate that too, as we look to kind of come up with an options. It'll be interesting if we conclude with the same option all the way through. So good observation. I like the idea of sidewalks on both sides, but am greatly worried about the negative impact on our property on Collister. And that is why we're here, and that's why we're having these conversations. And to that person who made that comment, I want to encourage you to reach out to me. I'd be happy to come out there, visit with you, and take a look at your property and some of these options as we move forward. I like the pathway onto. It creates a buffer from traffic and maintains safety. Trees belong in our front yards. And yes, they do, and your tree canopy is incredibly important, and we recognize that. All right, so I've read through most of these. We'll go ahead and jump on into the last question of the evening. And we just want to know, is there anything that we missed? Special considerations we should take into account? You walk the street, you ride the street, you drive the street. Your lens in which you see it is entirely different than ours. And so if there's something that stands out, now is the time to bring that to our attention. For instance, an example was folks pointed out earlier that when you come out on John's Landing, it's hard to see around that corner. That sight triangle is really difficult. That's a good observation, and one that those who reside on Collister or those who drive it often would recognize. So I'll give you a few moments. If you guys could just give us anything we need to take into consideration, now's the time to point that out and we can capture it. I'll pause and let you guys, your fingers do the typing. All right, aesthetics and landscaping, such as what was done on 15th Street. Yes, the 15th Street is a very good example of adding some pedestrian facilities on there while still adding that kind of landscaping attention. We walk, bike, and drive Collister regularly. My cyclists are concerned about being able to bike all the way down to State. Do they have to dismount and cross at Catalpa? In the facility treatments that we're looking at, there's one option, the pedestrian facilities all being on one side, the multi-use pathway. Yes, that would, they don't necessarily need to, but certainly could be more comfortable if they rode on the multi-use pathway. Why are the bulb outs on the west side, but pedestrian pathway on the east side? Actually, the bulb outs are going to be throughout the whole corridor to help facilitate pedestrian crossings at their appropriate locations. And so, although we recognize that the bulb outs on the west side there at John's Landing is to help facilitate a better crossing. Any feedback on the lateral canal properties? Will they be impacted? I need to look into that and get back to you. So if you could send me that question in particular, it'll have to be one I follow up on. I don't see the level of pedestrian traffic or bicyclists to warrant this big project. Maybe focus on Hill Road, or maybe bicyclists have to license and register their bike to pay for the roads. Our goal is to provide facilities throughout all of Ada County. This is one location that was brought to our attention, and that is why we're back here to revisit it. Would love for you to find examples of these concepts around Boise somewhere that people could walk and look at themselves to see how it looks and feels. Very good suggestion, and we'll go ahead and maybe dig around and see if we can come up with some examples and send them out. A share for the cyclists coming down the hill would give them better visibility for those exiting driveways. Experienced cyclists already ride this section anyhow. Yes, experienced cyclists do take the lane. That is pretty typical. When we look to building out these facilities, it's about the 8 to 80. It's not necessarily the ones who are comfortable, but rather the ones who want to get out on their streets and still feel comfortable. And so when we look to build out these facilities, we're really looking to that 10-year-old child who's trying to get to Catalpa Park. And so while we recognize what cyclists already do, we definitely want to take into consideration where our young children are going and make it comfortable for them. The pathway seems to end at Catalpa. How do cyclists get all the way to State? Same scenarios before they can take to the road. In the case of the multi-use pathway, they can certainly cross over. I really would be okay with no parking on Collister. I think that the street should be targeted for pedestrians and drivers. Can't think of any residents that have no parking abilities on their property that would make it essential to park on the street. Certainly recognize that lens in which you see the use of Collister. One of the most difficult things about projects like this is finding the balance between those who reside on Collister and those who use Collister. If you're not necessarily a resident, it's much easier to point to things that they may not necessarily use or have an opinion. In this case, we definitely recognize and have heard from Collister residents that parking is important, and finding a solution to ensure that they can continue to have people visiting their homes while also enjoying their home is important. And we think that the options with parking on one side provides that opportunity. I believe pedestrian volumes absolutely warrants this and appreciate the work. If there are lower volumes now, I think it's because people don't currently feel comfortable walking on it. And certainly that is a great observation. I will say I've been out there a couple times and seen people navigating that street. And it's certainly something that we're looking into, and that's why we're here to have this conversation. Collister residents have guests and need street parking. There are not side streets for visitors to park on. Yes, and we recognize that, and we definitely want to take that into consideration. That's why not a complete removal of parking on Collister is not an option. We need the sidewalks to wrap the corner part way at Collister and Hill. The path going from Collister to Maplewood is hazardous, especially in wet and snowing weather. Thank you for that observation. Yes, that's really good insight. That's what you guys can see on your street. And so it's so important you guys to point this out. If there's areas where we can kind of gap fill, this is a good time for us to do that with this project. Let me see, think of my residents that have no parking abilities on the property that would make it essential to park on street. Yes, and that's why we definitely are not looking at complete elimination of parking on Collister as an option. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into, I think that wraps up our questions. If you guys have any additional comments on the project itself, communication, anything in which we can do to enhance that communication, this is the time to plug that right here into this question. And in the meantime, I'll just take this opportunity to kind of talk about next steps. Tonight, we do wrap up the virtual open house. It's our second one today. But as I mentioned earlier, the survey has been open for a week and will stay open for one more week. So after today's presentation and conversations, and you feel like you would like to give us more input, I encourage you to do it on the survey. I encourage you to do it via email or call me. In addition to that, I also want to kind of talk about where we're going to go next. But before I do that, let's kind of go over some of this. Just a quick thank you. I do appreciate you guys participating. The nice note, the kind notice thing is very much appreciated. With that, what you guys can anticipate in the coming months. So tonight we're going to wrap up. We'll wrap up the survey here in a week, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're done. And so I want to encourage you to keep an eye out in your mailbox, as well as if you provided your email. It's really important because we're going to also communicate via email. We'll be back here in springtime or early summer where we're going to talk about some potential concepts. Now, will we be coming back to you and say, here's the final concept, or will we be coming back with a few more? We don't know yet. That's the importance of us getting this right. And so we're going to take all your feedback, take these concepts to the drawing table, look through them and see if that we can come up with a solution that's going to meet the greatest need for this community and greatest need for this neighborhood. And like I mentioned, finally finding that balance between providing a facility for everybody to navigate while also recognizing their homeowners on the street. And it's important that we respect those who reside there and those whose property could potentially, if be impacted. Did you say bike shares will not be considered at all? So for us to attain an LTS 1 or 2 on Collister, which is the highest level of protection for cyclists, the speeds would not necessarily allow for that. So Sharrows isn't necessarily an option that we would consider. We want to provide for folks who are of the younger crew, right? The 8-year-olds, the 9-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, we want to give them facilities to be able to navigate this space. And being able to ask a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old to jump in a road on a Sharrow isn't necessarily comfortable at 30 miles per hour. And so that's why we're looking to all these avenues. That's why we're looking to narrow the travel lanes, put designated bike and pedestrian facilities on this, so that way that 10-year-old getting to Catalpa Park can feel safe. Thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate you so much. I appreciate that. We've been hoping for something like this for years and excited to see its improvements for pedestrians and families in the neighborhood. And I will say it's been a privilege to work with all of you guys, and we're going to have many more months at this. If we have shoulders for parking, wouldn't the younger ones be able to cycle there? Our kids have done so. Yes, that's certainly what the current condition that is there. Again, that current condition doesn't necessarily provide the highest level of safety for children. And so while ACHD is taking this new approach, ensuring that people can navigate through our streets more comfortably, for us to attain that LTS guidelines that our commissioners have adopted, we have to provide some for dedicated space. I feel like the people who use Collister should not have so much say as people who live on Collister. This feels wrong to the homeowners on Collister. And thank you for your feedback, and that's why I'm here to have these conversations. If I haven't met with you, I'm not necessarily sure who that is, but I'd be happy to come out and chat with you on your property. I've already done it with several other property owners. Finding the balance between the needs of the community while also recognizing the importance of those who reside on Collister is our balance that we're trying to seek out. And so we want to attain facilities that has the least amount of disruption while also recognizing Collister residents as well as the community. And this is why we're having these conversations. And that's why it's not easy. And that's why we're going to continue to have these conversations in the coming months. Thank you. Very excited for the improvements on the corridor, our neighborhood with safe travel for pedestrians and cyclists. You're certainly welcome. All right, any more comments? So the invitation's out there. If you have any concerns or questions, feel free to contact me via that phone number. Feel free to reach out to me on the email. And again, if you have any other concerns or questions, I'd be happy to meet with you in person. These couple weeks, we're going to kind of go back to the drawing table, but we're not going to be back before you until next spring. So we ask for your patience as we kind of go to the drawing table and talk about this with our teams. And I hope to come back to you with a solution that's going to meet everybody's needs. While it's not easy, we recognize this is a very difficult task. Will all these questions and replies be available to read later? We can certainly make that happen. And so we'll find a means in which we can put that online and give you guys access to it. Or we can send you an email if you want to give us your email privately. All right, I think that wraps everything up. Here's your time. If you'd like to say something vocal, raise your hand. We can call on you. If that's not the case and we're all done, a few more moments on chat. We'll leave it up here for a few seconds. I'm looking to see if anybody's raised their hand and I don't see it. All right. I just want to say before I log off, it's been a privilege to work with all of you. I've certainly enjoyed this. This isn't an easy task. These are difficult passions of those who reside on Collister. I don't blame you, it's your home. And while we go to provide for everybody, we find that balance, and these further conversations are going to be very much necessary. So thank you so much. It's been a privilege. You guys know how to get in touch with me, email, via the phone, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. Survey will stay open for one more week, at which time it will close. We're going to take all your comments. I've read several of them already, and I just want to thank you guys so much for your participation. It is very, very important. I will leave you with this, that we are just a recommending body here. We are putting together from our technical team these concepts, but more importantly, we are not the decision-making individuals for these projects. These projects still have to go in front of the commissioners. They're your elected body. If for whatever reason you have concerns that aren't necessarily being met, I want to encourage you to go talk to your commissioners. They're the ones who will make the ultimate decision should this project move forward or not. An earlier comment that was not asked here, but I'll answer it. Projects like this do take some years. And so while we go into year 2022 for the concept, if it gets adopted, we still have to go into a design year, which takes a year. If there's right-of-way impacts, which I'm not certain there will be, but if there are, we always plan for that. That's a second year. So that's now 22, 23, 24, and construction 2025 and so on. I want to put that perspective out there, that outline. It is commission directive. It is the commissioners who make the ultimate decisions. We're just the folks who are putting this all together and having these conversations with you. All right, well, that being said, one last comment just came. Thank you all for your work, and your team is engaging with Collister. Certainly welcome to it. Thank you. I've enjoyed meeting many of you on your neighbor outside your house and working with you guys. So you take care. Happy holidays, and then we'll be in touch as the coming months.